introductions again, just for everybody's benefit, and then we'll let Steve and Doug take over for the evening. We've got almost everyone on Zoom as well. So I'm Shelley Reimer, City Administrator for City of Yamhill, and
Shay Corrigan, Mayor of Yamhill.
Ken Moore, Planning Commission.
Jenny Morrison, Economic Development Committee and Yamhill Downtown Association.
Mike McNally, Piercing Vineyard, right outside town.
Joy Goodrum, Economic Development Manager with Yamhill County.
Yvette Potter, citizen.
It's been a long time. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Jason Wofford, Public Works Director.
Philip Higgins, Yamhill Downtown Association, Economic Development Committee, and class of 1986.
You're letting
Yeah.
out now.
Yeah, go Tigers.
Jetta Dumdai, long-term community member, and I'm on the school board.
And Doug Rux, the Rux Group.
Steve Faust with 3J Consulting.
and we have Journey from 3J Online, and Mary Spencer, who's also a committee member from TNE, and Melissa with DLCD, and some guests from the community, it looks like.
And I think Pat maybe just pulled up.
Who did?
I think Pat, I
Oh,
see
yeah,
a work
Pat said he
trailer
was
outside.
here, and
I guess.
then I wasn't sure, but I put him out in there.
Want me to go?
Take it away.
All right. Good to see everyone. Good evening. Thanks for taking some time to spend with us tonight. You may recall our last CAC meeting. We threw a lot at you, and we decided towards the end of that meeting that it would probably be best to have another meeting to revisit some of that material and get guidance from you. We also didn't quite get to looking at the comprehensive plan as part of that meeting. So those are our two main agenda items for this evening. First, in just a minute, Journey is going to walk us through the comprehensive plan audit, and then Doug is going to revisit some of the key proposals from the or concepts from the code audit, so we can get some final guidance from you, and we can spend the next couple months working on drafting comprehensive plan and code audits. So, Journey, why don't you go ahead to the next slide?
I apologize for being late.
So we're going to start with the comprehensive plan audit. I don't know if anyone printed out or had a chance to look through the materials that we sent. I'm realizing maybe we could have made the font a little bit bigger here. But I think it's important to remember a few things. The purpose of the comprehensive plan audit is primarily to make sure that we're aligning with the code changes that are being proposed. That's one main purpose. Another one would be to make sure that the policies in the comprehensive plan related to housing and economic development or the downtown, the central business district, reflect the vision that the city has for the future. And so Journey and I went through the comprehensive plan, primarily looking at opportunities to make updates in line with what we've heard from all of you, and to make sure that we're aligned with the code changes we've been talking about. And then I guess a third piece of that comprehensive plan audit is just making sure that that things are where we are able to, with existing information, we're updating information in the comprehensive plan, making sure we're aligned with state law, things of that nature. So with that, we're going to spend hopefully about the next half hour just walking through these changes. In some cases, we don't have any questions for you. We're just informing you of some changes that we're making because it's making updates. In other cases, we want some guidance from you. So we're going to spend about a half an hour doing that, and then spend the following hour. Doug's going to take us through the revisiting the code changes. So Journey, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, that sounds great. Can everybody hear me all right?
Maybe a little bit louder.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm Journey. I'm an associate planner at 3J Consulting. I also grew up in Yamhill Carlton, so I've spent many times going to T&E and getting JoJo's, and it's been lovely. I'm excited for it to be more of a walkable place and see what comes from this project. So yeah, starting off with the comprehensive plan audit as well. We start with the comprehensive plan map. So while this project doesn't really have a scope or a budget To expand the central business district, we're suggesting that a policy be created to consider expanding it in the future, adding some more tax lots with more commercial and mixed-use designations. DLCD also suggests that we update the comprehensive plan map with current data. So some data that needs to be updated will include the state wetland inventory, soil, water, sewer, transportation, and topography.
If I could
Does anyone have
interrupt.
any?
Sorry,
Yeah.
Attorney, those are actually a series of maps in the comprehensive plan that are very much outdated, and we're just gonna update with more current information.
Does anyone have any questions or comments about that? All right. Going into the water supply system. So the water supply section should be updated with the most recent water system master plan information just to stay consistent. We're also suggesting that the city add a policy specific to the water supply issue in Yamhill, especially because it's a big community concern, especially in regard to development. Are there any questions about that one?
If anyone objects to things, let us know, but again, we have heard a lot of concern about the water system, so we wanted to have, insert a policy that's gonna reflect that.
Moving into economy of the city. So because the current comprehensive plan doesn't discuss the central business district, we recommend that the city should consider adding a goal that's specific to the CBD. Policies could then follow that encourage development that reflects your vision for downtown. So maybe I'm curious just if there are any ideas or any kind of language you'd like to see included that's goal oriented towards the central business district.
For those who weren't able to read through the materials, there's a goal and a policy all about industrial development. There's not really any policy guidance about the central business district, so we think that probably deserves its own goal and supporting policies. So
I believe we are in conversations about that on the Economic Development Committee.
okay.
So maybe we have some stuff that we may be able to contribute. Yes.
Well, the Economic Development Committee is a committee that, reports to the council, so we would make recommendations. The
Right.
council would have to approve those first before we could add it to a plan, but we would have some thoughts on it.
Or depending on, how you want to do things, you could give the recommendations to this process, and then they could get reviewed through this process as well. Whatever you prefer is fine with us.
That's fine too. I think we would just have to be a little.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, because we've actually done some of the work already, so, open source sort of thing.
Yeah,
The other piece is to go back to the work we did back in March.
Yeah.
Because there was a list of things identified for the downtown area that might be able to be reworded such as not necessarily a goal, but more of a policy approach.
yeah.
That was
And we
your,
just had a council work session last week that revisited that document and also kind of reprioritized this council's goals from that list as well. So it's pretty current. So we
Great.
could have a separate conversation maybe about that with economic development or something.
yeah, be happy to. We'd love to get input from the committee, and that was a great idea, Doug, to go back and look at or anything that came out of the recent council vision session would be great, and just give us some material to develop some policies. The goal's easy enough. We can model it after the one about industrial development, but tailor it more to commercial or downtown. But policies, we want to make sure the policies reflect the community's vision for the downtown, so.
I have a question about the water. Shelley, we were on a call at one point where we were talking about looking at regional water solutions. When this is in discussion, is that something that's being considered? Or is this more of a 30,000 foot level and? Okay, that's my answer.
But I think a policy around water would be something like, and forgive me for not having perfect language off the cuff, but, monitor and address, water issues that hinder development, or something, like you said, at the 30,000 foot level where it's in the comprehensive plan that this is an issue we want to address. It won't be prescriptive in terms of how it gets addressed or anything like that. There could be another policy if you all wanted something about working with regional partners, that could be part of something as well. Those are the types of high-level types of policies where your feedback's really helpful. If you say, yeah, we're actually working on this regional solution, that could be something that we put in
Well,
the,
it's one of the things we're looking at.
Yeah.
It's not determined that that is the direction we're going, but it's one of, what, 4?
so. This, even hearing this little bit of discussion helps me when I go to write the policies and say, okay, I understand what the situation is.
We can delve deeper into that too.
And of course, everyone's gonna get a chance to see the draft policies. This is just the brainstorming session. And then the group will see this again. We'll see the drafts next time. All right, Journey.
Awesome. That sounds great. Okay, moving into policy 1 of economy of the city. So while the comprehensive plan does currently speak a lot about industrial development, commercial development is rarely mentioned. So we're suggesting updating this policy to include sufficient commercially designated land to accommodate the city's anticipated needs and local commercial interests. So a policy that's a little more directed towards commercial development. We also heard from you and from city staff that an attractor is really needed in the city to encourage development of downtown, like a distillery, winery, or other kind of business. And because of this, we are suggesting including a policy that encourages and semi-industrial uses within the city, and that focuses on the central business district.
This is something, Doug, you've been talking about through the code, and I think more than anything, we'll make sure that the comprehensive plan supports wherever we land with the code in terms of industrial uses in the downtown.
Yeah, because part of that is what we've heard from this committee and in the community meeting, the question about, well, if we wanted to have a distillery, can we have that in the central business district? Yes, I can write code that says, you have a maximum square feet of space or a percentage of your overall square footage. So you still have that commercial focus, but you've got this kind of manufacturing. Could be a winery, could be a distillery, could be a brewery that's on the back side of the building somehow or whatever. They're all site design pieces, but it allows that to occur rather than just saying, yeah, we can just have industrial uses in our CBD, which is very important to keep your central businesses for your commercial and walkability component.
Thanks. Okay.
Awesome. And then moving into policy 3. So within policy 3, we suggested updating the wording of this policy to encourage growth of existing businesses and entrepreneurs and to attract new businesses to create jobs with a range of wages. So we just kind of tweaked the language a little bit in that policy.
Okay.
Moving into policy 9. So while this policy discusses directing incompatible industrial growth away from residential, there's an opportunity to discuss some live-work options or home occupations for residential parcels that are adjacent to the CBD. So policy language could also be updated to create compatibility of uses instead of segregating these uses. So we're kind of using this policy as a jumping off point to discuss uses that would be helpful within the CBD or around the CBD. So yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on live work options or home occupations that would be adjacent to the CBD.
Strong proponent of.
Yeah, I think since we're not going to be expanding the CBD as part of this project, we'll be setting you up to look at that in the future, but allowing those home occupations as a way without expanding the CBD, but to have similar uses right adjacent to it. And we did talk about live work a bit, and Doug, I think you clarified that live work would be okay in the CBD, but you would just need to have that commercial use on the ground floor. Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So it gets to an architectural design of how you connect the living space to the commercial space. So it's vertical rather than horizontal. So it can do, so you wanna, the concept is to make sure you've got your ground floor commercial, keep that pedestrian walkability component. But then you could separate that and just say, okay, just have a commercial and separate, or you could design the structure so that there's a connection between the two, commercial space and the residential space. That way it would become a live work, but still ground floor commercial, keeping residential off of the ground floor.
That changes our current code though, right?
Yes.
Okay, because we currently allow it on the ground floor in the back, right?
Yeah, in the back.
Did we put a height restriction on that?
No, we'll get to that when I get into the code piece.
Um, Lastly, for economy of the city, we have a suggested policy. And in past meetings, we discussed affordable housing as well as mixed use opportunities in the CBD. That kind of goes off a little bit of what Doug was saying. And so there's an opportunity to include another policy or subsection about allowances in commercial zones for affordable housing or the encouragement of affordable housing that's near commercial. I'm curious about your thoughts in regard to that.
Examples of-
Well, I think on the mixed use piece, maybe this conversation follows
Yeah,
the
so
code conversation.
yeah, so just kind of briefly, is that you have a state requirement that you have to allow affordable housing. So if you were in your CBD, you have your ground floor commercial, that means the developer could build units above. They could be single room occupancy, they could be apartment units. But on the affordability, it's basically, it's 80% or less of area median income. So it's how they fund it, where they get their funding from, could be through low income tax credits. Makes it difficult when you've got the commercial piece. Or other things through Oregon Housing and Community Services and funding streams that they may have, and then maybe trying to link those even with Business Oregon for the commercial piece on the bottom. So just trying to set it up that there are different ways where you can get funding streams to allow these different housing types.
All right, Trini.
All right, moving into the housing section of the comprehensive plan, we call out 2 goals and a couple policies. So for goal 1, in the original goal, it notes to develop an opportunity for housing development to meet the needs of all of those at the lowest possible cost with the highest possible standards. So we kind of noted that this language was not super clear and objective, and we found that this goals language could be reworked to say to develop an opportunity for housing development to meet the needs of households at all income levels. There's also an opportunity to encourage the development and preservation of housing that's affordable for low to moderate income households. So we can kind of call that out a little bit more in this policy if we'd like to. Any comments or questions?
So currently, as Journey said, the policy finishes with how does it finish? What was the language we recommend removing?
We recommended removing lowest possible cost with the highest possible standards.
Seems a little bit subjective rather than just by itself saying to develop an opportunity for housing development to meet the needs of households at all income levels. That last little piece is somewhat subjective, and so we think removing that cleans that up. And then the second piece that Journey mentioned is just talking about emphasizing a variety of housing types. And also included the concept of preserving affordable housing types as well. Affordable is probably not the right word.
I was gonna say that preserving always gives me pause. So, because, you know, what exactly does that entail? I mean, are we preserving is sort of a NIMBY bent. And if you're using that policy, like weaponizing it like you would an environmental policy or a historic review board or something like that, you're saying, well, we're trying to preserve affordable housing, ergo, we're going to block whatever progress is being made. That gets me.
How about the word maintaining? If you drop preservation of and put in maintaining.
Yeah.
Affordable to low, moderate income
Yeah, that
households.
presupposes a nicer standard than simply.
It assumes that you already have some,
Right.
but even in the future, as time goes on, you might get some, but you want to maintain that. So if you get a project in 5 years, you want to be able to maintain that.
Well, and it also goes back to what you were saying earlier about funding mechanisms, right? So if there's like a single affordable house that instead of mandating it, that it be preserved and it gets torn down and a fourplex built there and one of 25% of the units are somehow like then affordable, you've maintained the affordability standard without preserving the substandard asset.
I think on the opposite end of the spectrum of what you're saying is I think what we had in mind and a discussion around the state is communities shouldn't be so quick to tear down older housing that is a naturally occurring source of affordable housing, right? You know, how you implement that policy is a challenge, though, I think, in terms of what exact, if we're gonna put this in here, what exactly would the city be doing to maintain or preserve that housing? But it is a really much talked about topic right now. How do we keep that older housing rather than seeing it get torn down when it's like I said, naturally occurring affordable housing for a lot of families.
Maintain doesn't have a kind of a value to it. Do we want to add a word like and encourage or support that? We want to go that direction, or we're just kind of see what happens and keep it at status quo? Maybe that's what we want, but I'm just maintain just kind of this static. Is it we want it to stay static, or do we want it to advance?
Good question.
Yeah. The language right now does say encourage the development and preservation, or yeah.
I don't have it, so great.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And it's hard to read on the screen because. Any other thoughts on this one? I mean, again, we can take what we hear, even if it's not a lot today, and come back with draft policies, and then we'll have this conversation again with something concrete for you to react to. Okay, let's keep going, Journey.
All right. So for goal 2, the school lists mobile homes as a potential source of housing supply. And we just found that there's an opportunity to expand the school and speak about treating manufactured homes the same as single-family dwellings. So we changed the text a little bit, and also try to match them to be similar to single-family dwellings.
And Doug, I believe manufactured homes have there's some requirements around allowing manufactured homes statewide, right?
Yeah, wherever you allow a detached single family home, you have to allow manufactured homes / mobile homes. Remember, mobile homes are July 1976, manufactured homes are after that time period.
So this one is really aligning the policies with state law. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, no, I was getting.
That was the question.
Like the manufactured versus the mobile.
Yeah, that's something we'll get into. I'll have to clean up the code because there's a lot of inconsistencies.
Okay, Journey.
All right, going into policy 1. So while the original policy notes that there's an opportunity for a mix of housing types and densities throughout the city, we noted that there's an opportunity to discuss those types of densities and housing types more specifically within this policy. So it just helps to better align it with the updates that are coming to the code. And I know that later in this presentation, we're going to discuss the different density types that Doug will present later. So we'll probably get more in depth within that section.
We want the comp plan to reflect the where we land with housing types. The other question there, Journey, sorry, I saw you flipped ahead, but I just wanted to point out that one of the questions we had, and we talked about it as a smaller group, but certainly interested in hearing from you, is whether or not we want or need to call. We're not required to, but do we talk generally about middle housing, or do we call out things like, attached single family homes and duplexes, and do we call out specific types? And we can revisit that conversation when we talk through the residential code piece.
All right, going into policy number 4. So this policy specifically lists all urban services must be available for new development to occur, and we just suggested that this policy may need to be reworked to include a process for supporting development of services for housing development. We include some suggested language that says the city shall plan for full urban services to support residential development. Development shall be approved when services are available or can be provided by the developer. We also note that there's an opportunity to update the policy to encourage infill on vacant parcels to utilize existing utilities that the city may have already have planned.
So
Any
two
comments?
pieces there, yeah, the first one was really just kind of rewording the policy that's there. We're not taking away that that utilities need to be provided along with housing. We're just made it a little more collaborative in that the city should be planning for it. And then development shall be approved only when those services are available. And the second one is just talking about encouraging infill to take advantage of existing utilities. Any concerns about those? All right, Journey.
All right. Lastly, in the housing section, we have a suggested policy. So the comprehensive plan currently does not have any housing policies expressing the need to plan for a 20-year land supply to meet population projections and housing needs. So we just have some suggested language that's a little broad that notes to monitor residential land development to ensure that there is enough residential land to accommodate the long-term forecast for population growth. It's just making sure we're in line with those standards.
And this one, we know that the city is potentially, not for sure, but potentially interested in looking at the urban growth boundary. And this is a step you would have to take in order to expand the urban growth boundary. First, you would have to look at your 20-year housing need and compare that to the buildable lands inventory that we prepared. So this is a policy that's really, should you choose to go down that path, this supports you in looking at your housing supply relative to your 20-year housing need. And even if you do a study about your housing need, you're not necessarily, Yamhill, due to your size, you're not necessarily required to address that. But again, this sets you up should you want to go down that path of looking to grow the city.
When was the last time there was a plan done?
I believe it was 1997. And the projections, the population, because all the population projections and the language in the plan talk about the year 2017, a 20-year span. So it's been quite a while since it's been looked at.
And what does the population compare to based off what the projections were, you know?
I do not know that. We could easily look at that for you and come back with
Yeah,
that next time.
I'd be curious, just
Yeah.
because, I mean, considering the town's had pretty major growth in the last 36 months or so with the 2 new subdivisions. I mean,
It's interesting, a lot has changed at the state level and how those projections are developed. I think it used to come from the state and go to the counties, and then they'd work with the cities to do those projections. More recently, each city would get a population projection from Portland State University. And now, as of January 1st, what happens is those population projections go to the state, and the state is allocating the housing need at different income levels to each community. So if Yamhill was to start this process today, we would start with both the buildable lands inventory that we prepared through this process, and then we would get a 20-year housing need allocation from the state, broken down by different income levels. And that's what we would be comparing to see if the supply meets the demand.
And the state gets their numbers from PSU.
The state gets the population projection from PSU. I don't know quite as much about how they translate the population number into needed units. And then we would translate needed units into acres and compare the need from an acreage perspective to that buildable lands inventory and our supply. And that's how you would determine if the city needs to grow to accommodate that future growth, or if it can all be contained within the existing urban growth boundary.
Yeah, the school district gets that information from Portland State.
Yeah.
And the projections that they've provided, we've never gotten anywhere close to. So I just wonder where the data comes
Yeah.
from. And
It's a little bit different methodology. There was the report that came out that has some numbers that shows for communities around the state about what your projected number of units would be over a horizon. I was just looking at it the other day, and so you take the PSU numbers and then it gets to the state, and we've been to those sessions where they've tried to explain it all. but it's sort of like in a black box. Then it crunches it all up and then they come out with numbers and an allocation for communities.
So if we're not obligated to meet a certain population or a certain number of housing units and types of housing based on our population, but yet we want to expand the UGB, once we want to do that, then we would be required to meet those, or does it, is it still based on population?
So Yamhill's, this gets a little complicated, so bear with me. So Yamhill, due to its size, is not required to grow. But if the city wants to grow, you would do this housing study, what's now called a housing capacity analysis. That would essentially it would, like I said, compare supply and demand and tell you if growth is needed. Once the city adopted that plan, then the city would be required to address that housing need. Yeah, that would trigger needing to address that housing
So
need.
essentially, once we decide, yes, we want to do the UGB extent, we want to try for UGB expansion, we would then need to be.
Generally
the state's
speaking, yes.
requirement for housing.
Especially around housing. There's a similar process to look at the need for employment lands, commercial and industrial lands. However, there aren't, you could do that study and adopt it and decide not to grow your urban growth boundary, while the housing one, due to some court cases, I'm pretty certain, and Melissa can jump in if I'm stating anything wrong, but once you adopt that housing study that says you need more land, you would need to address that somehow, either by growing your UGB or by making more code changes within your current UGB to accommodate that need.
Efficiency measures. So when
Yeah.
Steve mentioned infill before, so if you had a 16,000 square foot lot, we'll get into lot sizes, but you know, how do you take that lot? How do you divide it up into other lots? Be more efficient with the land supply that you have.
Did I-
Melissa, let's let Melissa talk real quick. I think she can unmute herself.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to jump in to mention that the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis methodology is prepared by DAS, the Department of Administrative Services. That whole document, if you want a deep dive, is available online. At the end are tables with specific allocations for cities, so you can see what Yamhill's allocation is in there, if that's helpful. And I didn't have anything to add to Steve's assessment. He got that spot on. So unless there are other questions, I'll go back on mute. Thank you.
If anybody wants that document, I have it.
I was just gonna
email it
say,
to Shelley and-
Melissa could, or I could, or Doug could, we can get you that information.
I'd be curious to look at it, just for educational purposes.
You have
That's fine, I can get it to whoever wants it.
Was the process you described independent of the requirement of Yamhill to maintain a 20-year housing? To be able to maintain a growth boundary that contains a 20-year inventory. Is that no longer the case?
It is not the case because Yamhill, that requirement comes into play at when the city reaches 10,000 population.
Is that always been the case, or is that a new rule that the small cities don't have to worry about? Because I was under the impression we are out of compliance because we do not have a 20-year inventory.
I'll hand it over to Melissa. I don't think it's a new rule, but I, like you, have been confused about this in the past, so that might be the case. Melissa, did you have anything to add about whether the requirements for smaller communities have changed over time, or if this has been the case for a longer period of time? Kind of the size threshold.
Yeah, I don't have as much of the history there because I'm not a housing expert. I'd have to defer to our housing division for that. But the landscape has changed with the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis methodology and the way we're going to be planning inside cities. But it's all above kind of that 10,000 threshold. So nothing's changed recently that I know of in terms of the small impact for smaller cities. You can opt in to planning the way that larger cities do, and in that case, like Steve already explained, you'd be subject to the same kind of requirements for housing planning as those larger cities are, if that helps. If you want to know more of the history, I can kind of do some digging and give you more background if that's helpful at any point.
I think to your point, Ken, as a planner, I've always had this mantra in my head of 20-year supply, and I kind of repeated that in my work, and then more in recent years learned, oh no, that's only for larger communities. It's not a requirement for smaller communities. So
Which the irony is that if you don't actually have the land set aside to grow into, you never become a larger community in the first place.
good discussion. All right, Journey, let's keep going.
Yeah. Going into the land use and urbanization section, it's exactly what we were just discussing. We just have a policy, a proposed policy to conduct a new housing capacity analysis and economic opportunity analysis to determine land need and sufficiency for the future. So it's exactly what we were talking about if we're thinking about expansion or growth.
Again, with our policies, what we want to do is set you up to and support you to do the work, because I know the department, whether or not it's required, they encourage communities to plan for the future and look at future growth. But we also don't want to create a policy that's going to lock you into a certain path, because we know this is something you're exploring. So we would certainly be thoughtful with our language in this policy to support planning for the future, but not lock you into anything or have a policy that doesn't align with how the community wants to grow or when the community wants to grow. Okay.
Awesome. And last section of the comprehensive plan audit, it's the implementation section. And so this section is going to heavily reflect the changes to the city's code that we're making. And these changes, a lot of them are going to be discussed in the next section of the presentation. So I'll just give you kind of a broad overview of what we found. So we're going to update the section to a type 1 through 4 process as noted in the code audit. We're hoping to change site design review to development permit review to stay consistent as well. And also specifics are needed in this section. Details can be provided to address the different types of housing standards and more in an updated policy. So we're just trying to stay compliant with the code audit as well. And that is it. I'm going to pass it off to Doug now if there are no other questions about this section.
Thank you, Journey.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Doug.
Okay.
Journey's going to keep running the slideshow for us.
You ready to get to the really mundane stuff? Okay. So, on the residential, so we had the conversations, we've talked, given you kind of the code audit. That's
Next
a lot to read. Just hold right there.
Okay.
Given you a lot to read, but as we've gone through this, we've kind of broken it down into some bigger categories. And I can tell you right now, because I've already started working on the code on it, there's changes in virtually every section of your zoning ordinance. And there's changes in multiple sections of your land division ordinance that need to be made. So the first big one we've talked about is your review types. So we've identified and suggested to you to go through establish a type 1 through 4 review process. And the questions have come up, well, what's a type 1 review? It's a ministerial review, it's clear and objective. And so here's some examples. Doing a code interpretation would be a type 1. Doing a final plat. Home occupations, the whole chapter on home occupations, in my opinion, needs to be redone because you got kind of a type 1 process and you got a type 3 process. Planning commission. Should probably all just be a type 1. Property line adjustments, sign permits, similar use authorizations, and temporary uses. Those would all be administered by the planning official. The planning official is your city administrator or their designee, which the designee at this point in time is Walt, because he's your planner. So it's not other staff. There's a chain that you follow to get through that. Type 2 reviews, and in the type 2, there would be notice that goes out to surrounding property owners that's listed in the code. Type 1, there is no notice. But type 2s would be things like code adjustments, partitions or replats of partitions, your site development permit process, and subdivisions and or replats of subdivisions. Now I broke this into 2 pieces. You actually have some language in your code that talks about riparian corridors, and it gives you some mathematical equations, something we need to talk about for another map.
Okay.
But if you have a riparian corridor, which is also usually correlated to your floodplain, is that if it doesn't have a riparian or a stream or a floodplain on it, then you could do it as a type 2. If it has a floodplain or a riparian, then it would be a type 3. So clarification. Type 3 requires public hearing before the planning commission. Conditional uses, specific conditional uses, non-conforming use reauthorizations, plan unit developments, subdivisions with a stream corridor or a floodplain on it, and variances. And then the type 4 reviews, which requires planning commission and city council. Planning commission reviews it, makes a recommendation to the city council, would be annexations, code text amendments, comprehensive plan and map amendments, and zone map changes. Now, we talked before about in that 1 through 4, there's some efficiency measures that come. Why would the planning commission be looking at a sign permit?
I don't know.
Right now, that's the way the code is set up.
I do
The
know
planning
that.
commission essentially looks at everything. So there's some very simple things that are very clear and objective, sort of like check the box. Does it meet a numeric standard? Staff can easily do that. Opens up the planning commission to deal with more broader planning issues for the community overall. Similar on the type 2, but the type 2, you get the notice that goes out to surrounding property owners, so they have the ability to provide comments that the staff would have to take into consideration when they write the decision. So that list I gave you for that. Again, the type 3, property owners surrounding, they get noticed. You do the notice in the paper or how you're supposed to do your noticing. And then it goes to the planning commission for a public hearing. They can either submit in written comments, they can come and testify in front of the planning commission. But again, it's that shorter list of conditional uses, specific conditionals, non-conforming plan unit subdivisions with a stream corridor or a floodplain, and the variances. It really doesn't change what currently in your code to deal with annexations, text amendments to your zoning ordinance, your comp plan, and your zone, because that still right now has to go through planning commission and city council. So I would suggest that's probably want to go to the 1 through 4. There are lots of changes to go through in the code because there's lots of places that list planning commission would have to be changed to the planning official. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I kind of got to that point and I stopped and I said, okay, we need to figure this one out. Thoughts?
Yeah,
I like 1 through 4 just because it's consistent with other jurisdictions. And I know maybe that doesn't matter as much to Yamhill because it's just Yamhill, but for somebody who does things in other places, it's nice to have the consistency as you work through other communities. And if we're growing, it is also a positive when you have outside developers who are coming in to have clear and objective
and
criteria, right? That's the same as another community.
How about from our planning commissioner?
We just rewrote the sign ordinance, and we created electronic message sign ordinance. And we have history here that makes us different. In that there was staff approval of a sign that most of us don't like. And we as citizens sit to stop things like that from happening. Now, those staff people are gone, but it happened, and it made a lot of people upset.
It was approved by staff, although it was supposed to go to planning and didn't follow code or criteria.
So we see an example of what can happen when citizens don't look at it. And when I hear type 2 is code adjustments, I think that's another, and replatting of a subdivision. I feel like citizens should look at that.
Citizens would, I mean, not planning commission, there would be notifications, just so everyone's clear. In the type 2, there are public notifications, but you're correct in that it wouldn't go to planning commission.
So these are notifications, and then the results would be people would put in their 2 cents and staff would make a decision.
Yes. But staff has to consider the comments that have been submitted, and the comments that submitted should apply to the criteria. Comments that are submitted is like, I just don't like it. I'll use that as an example. That's not a criteria. So staff should say, we don't have a criteria for I don't like it. Tactfully, professionally responding to that.
So the way things are divided between 1, 2, 3, and 4, I think went by me pretty fast, and I would probably need more description of
Yeah, it wasn't.
what each of one of those
I
are.
couldn't find it in the presentation.
No, it's something that you had brought up before. When we had the community meeting, the question came up, what is it? And so I put together a list yesterday. He said, okay, because I'm working on the code language. I said, okay, let me start to cut and paste this stuff. And at least I'll walk through it. Again, I can get this to Shelley, get it to Steve, we can get it to Shelley. We can get it emailed out to you so you can see the list.
And what did we have, do you remember what was in the original document that we sent out to everyone? The code audit document?
In that, it just generically identified, should we change the system?
Okay,
And go to a type 1 through 4 rather than everything in the code goes to the planning commission.
I think it could be adjusted. I agree. But what goes where, I think is, will be reflected by our experience and the personality of the town.
Well, and I think, I mean, if I'm not incorrect, you can cut and paste things into whatever. I mean, if something that's normally in a type 1, you said you actually really, the town felt strongly that it was a type 4.
well.
A type 2.
Yeah. Say type 2.
I could approach it this way. I mean, if the consensus of the committee is, yeah, let's structure it as type 1 through 4. In that document, it will list out these, and when we have the CAC number 4,
Yeah.
you can look at it, you can say, no, I think, what we had for just generically sign permits is like, no, message centers should go to the planning commission, but everything else staff can do. Then we can start to break that out accordingly, but I just wanted to start with here's the traditional list of what's considered in a type 1, 2, 3, and 4.
The sign, for example, because we were so sensitive to, we put that in there that we want to see every sign.
Okay.
We're not gonna let that happen again. So that's kind of why that's in that particular ordinance.
Do people support what Doug proposed in terms of we start down this path and then if you all decide that certain items should be moved up or down in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll do that at the next meeting?
No.
Yeah, I'd support that.
I have a question about that, because I think if it's very descriptive and prescriptive about what the sign ordinance is, and someone comes in with a sign that doesn't match that, then I'm sorry, it doesn't match what we're trying to accomplish here, then it doesn't have to go any further than the person who makes that decision.
And under that situation is that if a sign permit was submitted and it went through and it met its height, its size, whatever those dimensional standards are, you can't regulate the text, but you can configuration of it. And if an application came in, staff reviewed it and it didn't meet them all, then staff should be writing a decision of denial.
Correct.
When the applicant gets that, they then can appeal that decision
Right,
to the planning commission.
yes.
Staff did not respond that way.
It sounds like you had a staff issue at that time.
For sure.
Rather than, it may not be that there was a problem with the code language, it was how it was processed was not done correctly. And so that's where it's incumbent upon the planning official to make sure whoever is assigned, they're following through that. Shelley was not here at that point in time. So those checks and balances need to be in place. But again, if everybody agrees to the approach of 1 to 4, there's ways we can move things around of what level, what gets reviewed at. Your type 4 council has to adopt ordinances for this stuff. And so they have to make that decision. There's other things that the planning commission can adopt. I believe it's either a resolution or however yours is set up that you can approve. But even planning commission decisions are appealable to the city council.
And the alternative is if we were to just not do what you're recommending, it would be to keep the status quo. And the downside of that is that potentially developers might not look at EML. Is that the downside of keeping things as is?
Yeah, I mean, I won't say all communities have gone to this system, but many, many, many communities have gone to it. So if they step back, and it's like Yam Hills Code is structured under an old methodology from the Bureau of Governmental Research and Services out of the University of Oregon back in the mid-70s. And the world has changed a lot since the mid-70s. And so I picked up a few codes in Yamhill for a couple of communities. They're kind of still modeled under that old one. Yamhill is one of those. the others, they have gone to this different approach of making it clear, here's where it's at. It also then frees up some financial resources for the city, because not everything is going to the planning commission, staff is doing it. I think Walt mentioned at one of our meetings that it also provides the opportunity for the planning commission to look at the bigger planning issues and focus on those. But there are still some things that the planning commission would still look at. And again, there's this whole hierarchy of appeals. Type 1 can be appealed to the planning commission. Type 2 can be appealed to the planning commission. A type 3 planning commission decision can be appealed to the city council. These are all at the local level. Then there's appeals that go beyond that to land use board of appeals.
It sort of helps cities and committees to be proactive as opposed to reactive, right? Because the way you have it set up now is everything has to be like vetted, read through, vetted and approved by a committee of multiple people once a month at 6 p.m., which is super inefficient for everybody. So
That's what I was going to bring up as, speaking from the government perspective, because we love red tape. This would eliminate red tape, I think. And then we're not going to be, someone's not going to be waiting maybe a year or 6 months, or I don't know how long it takes to get something through the planning commission, but it streamlines the process. Is from what I'm hearing, from what you're telling us, is there's a streamlined process.
It streamlines it. You still have, from the time an application is determined complete, you have 120 days to get through all the local review processes and appeals. So there is what we call a shot clock. There's a shot clock on all applications, except for when you get to the type 4 that are legislative in nature, then that shot clock goes away.
But I'd like to address Gloria's point on, well, if it's in the ordinance, then it's cut and dry. We spent 6 months writing that electronic message sign, and it was, well, we asked a lot of questions. You were there, you were on the commission then. It was complicated. There's a lot of factors. There's brightness, there's how fast it can change. All these things. We put this thing together. We're thinking, is this perfect? Did we catch everything? No, probably not. So we said, we're making it conditional use. You're gonna have to come, the sign that's gonna go on the gas station. I think if you asked a lot of people in town, do you want the planning commission to look at that sign? They'd say yes. What is that gas station sign gonna look like? It will come to us, we're gonna look at it, our next meeting, and we're gonna go, yeah. Or, wait, this isn't what we had in mind when we wrote this ordinance. We have conditional use on this. We goofed. And if that discourages development at the cost of having signs that we don't like, I don't think it's gonna be a big discouragement.
right, so I will say, I'll contextualize this. So, because it does, now maybe not for a gas station sign or, a small sign or something like that, but I was working with a client who was looking at a piece of property in a municipality that would have brought about 300 jobs to that community. The review and approval of their development would have gone through the type 4 process. So it would have been conditioned on planning and council approval for this specific development, which, they would have spent $500,000 and, a year and a half to get to yes. But the yes was not a clear and objective yes, right? Because there was a non-objective standard to that. And so they decided to not pursue that because they went to some place that did not have that process. So again, it depends, you put yourself in a position where sometimes you get the control you want, but you don't get the result that you want. Now, I'm not saying that in this instance, Yamhill is not big enough that it's playing in that realm. So it may be moot, but just
type 4 decision, it's almost like an example that's way beyond what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well,
Down on the 1s and the 2s and the 3s.
Yeah, so Ken, if this committee said, yeah, let's take this approach, there's opportunity to tweak it and move things. And you theoretically, you could say any message center sign, electronic reader board sign, is that your sign permits are type 1, except for electronic message center signs, and they are a type 3. That means it's not necessarily a conditional use, but it's a review by the planning commission to determine if it's acceptable and meets the standards that are in the code.
Let me back up. Code changes. If that type 2, they can change the code, then staff could change the code that makes electronic sign approval
No,
conditional use.
it's now,
Code changes, what did I mishear it?
yeah, code changes have to occur,
Code additions,
code adjustments.
adjustments, okay, that's.
So there's lots of, yeah, code adjustments are a very different thing. So a code adjustment is, you can set it up that you can get a 10% adjustment towards the width of your property frontage or to a setback.
Okay,
A code
change the
change
code.
is the council has to approve a code change.
Okay.
You're changing the development standards.
I wonder if what we couldn't do is, we get this list that Doug put together to Shelley, and we don't wait for Doug to finish the draft code. We get this out to you sooner than later, and you all can think about what items you would want under the different 1 through 4 categories. If that sounds acceptable, and then we'll revisit it again when we come back together.
I wanted to throw this down strongly, and I feel I have. I'm fine. I'm like, what works out, what the city wants, what we all decide is great. But I wanted to make the case from where the planning commission has been coming from for the past 2 or 3 years. If that changes, because because that's what people want.
It's really helpful context for
I'm on
sure.
board, but I wanted to throw down strong context of where we come from.
Appreciate it. Okay, Journey, next slide. All right, so now we're dealing with the issue on duplexes. So questions have come up before. Does the city have to allow duplexes? No, you're under the 2,500. But in your grant, it was one of the things to look at. You already in your code allow duplexes. So the issue then is adjusting the regulations such that it looks like you're a community of 2,500. I want to make sure that's, I thought a lot about how to say this. So you already have them, but it's modifying the standards. And those standards would be that you could have anywhere where you allow a detached single-family home, you would also allow a duplex. Right now, you're limited to corner lots. This proposal, you allow them wherever there's a detached single-family home that's allowed. You call them 2-family. Nomenclature now is duplex, so update it to the current nomenclature. Right now, it requires a development permit to get a duplex. Proposal is not require a development permit. You treat it just like a detached single-family home. So as long as they meet the structure height, they meet the setbacks, they meet the lot coverage requirements, treat it just like a single-family home. So that was the concept behind that. And that was really kind of the big emphasis of your whole grant was to, I think the language in the grant which was brought up that, getting close to 2,500, we'll know you're less than that, but that was the language that was in the grant itself, but we're approaching it as treating it like you are 2,500 in population and then following the requirements of state law or duplexes.
And while this is the type of change that isn't going to change your community overnight, incrementally, it's going to allow more housing opportunities for more people. So I think it's a nice policy or, change it, or I guess it is a change in the code to allow them on all single family lots. It's not going to impact that character like a lot of people are worried about but it is going to be significant in the long run in terms of providing more housing opportunities. Gloria?
So with regard to duplexes, correct me if I just heard what you said, Doug, that there's the law, right? State law and that we would only be adopting this part of it that makes the town look like it's 2,500 people. And what other things are in there that we would not be adopting, and would that change?
You wouldn't be regulating.
Okay.
In your code, that there are some design elements for duplexes that would go away. You're simply looking at for a duplex, lot coverage, setbacks, parking, and structure height. Same things you look at in a single family home.
But what about other
on its
aspects of the
surface,
law?
the middle housing laws For communities up to 10,000, this is the only requirement, is that you allow duplexes. Once you get over, forgive me on the thresholds, but the larger communities then have to get into triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, and townhomes. But you would basically this change would bring you up to par with the requirements that communities of 2,500 have.
That's what I
So I
was
think it's
trying to ask.
significant.
Thank you
Yeah.
for speaking.
He said it much more eloquently than I did.
I wasn't speaking what was happening in my head. It wasn't coming out. Thank you.
So, everybody okay, well, with that approach? Okay.
Great.
Accessory dwelling units. So this is another one, there's a set of guidelines that DLCD has. You already allow accessory dwelling units, they're in a limited nature. And so this would say that if you have a detached single-family home in a zone that allows it, you could also have an accessory dwelling unit. So that would be your R1, R2, R3, and your RLC zones. It's all allow single family. We would update the sections of your zoning regulations so that it has to have a separate entrance, so you can't have them connected into the main structure, it's gotta be separate. Would increase the size to 50%, the primary unit with a maximum size of 1,000 square feet. Right now, you've got a 40% and 800 square feet, so a little adjustment there is suggested. Removing all the design compatibilities. There's so many different styles and designs of accessory dwelling units now. Right now, you've got language that says it has to match the exterior of the primary unit. We're saying, and if you follow the guidelines from DLCD, change that. No owner residency requirement. So property owner could have a detached single family home, they can have an ADU, and they do not have to live on the property. They could rent both of those units out. Requirement, no off-street parking for an ADU. Then we talked before about service connections. So right now, the way the ordinance is written is that you have to have a separate sewer and water connection. That's cost. So we're talking about trying to provide housing that is affordable in nature, not talking affordable housing, but affordable in nature. And so in some other communities I've done this, we've said, no, you can tie in to the water and the sewer on the main residence. It's kind of an either or situation. And then the last piece of this would be that if you have an ADU, you cannot partition off your property and create a separate lot for the ADU. It always has to be attached on the same lot with the primary unit.
Is there a limit to the number of ADUs you may have in your property, or is it
Well,
how many? Oh,
one
okay, so it doesn't
ADU.
make how many acres you have or whatever.
If you had a 2-acre lot and a house on it and you were within the city limits and it was zoned R1, you could have one accessory dwelling unit.
Is 1,000 square foot typical?
That's what I've seen in a number of codes, yes.
I've seen 75, some 50 instead.
Not really. Again, this is one of those things that's been changing the last couple of years and each community is looking at it differently. But my suggestion, just from my research and working on some other communities, is making it so that the ADU can be no more than 50% of the size of the primary unit. And then this cap of that ADU cannot be more than 1,000 square feet. Now, someone might say, do you mean 1,000 square feet if it's just one floor, or is that 1,000 square feet for 2 floors? If it's 1,000 for one, then you can stack it and you can have 2. No, it would be a gross,
usable square feet.
of 1,000 square feet.
Now, the parking, is it no street parking allowed or no street parking required?
No off-street parking required.
Required, okay.
And of course, if you wanted to build a house like you had suggested that with an ADU and rent them both out, there's nothing to prohibit you from having separate water and sewer lines.
Correct.
For ease of rental, right? Because that would, be a source of contention likely.
It could be, but I looked at this as trying to provide the option. There's the way you have it written now that requires that you have to have separate, but the other option is that you could connect into the existing sewer and water of the existing home and not have to do a new sewer and water tap.
Which from.
And they have to make sure that their pipes and so forth are big enough in the primary unit.
Shaking your head, buddy.
Yeah, I'd greatly oppose that. I mean, just due to the fact, I mean, I could see if No, I would just oppose it. I'm not even
Tapping
gonna
in,
argue that fact.
you don't like the ADU tapping into the existing?
Correct.
But the idea was to make it easier for people to, so that people can have more places to
theoretical.
live, like the parking, you know, used to, so the streets are gonna be crowded. Yeah, because we're wanting to have more population density.
So,
Example being, we have a duplex in town that was sold separately, but they were grandfathered into the same system. Nobody wanted to take ownership of when it went awry, basically. So there was an argument between both homeowners essentially in saying that I'm not taking care of it because they were on a grandfather system that ran into one. Their waters were sourced out.
but so on the ADU though, it would still be the same lot.
There's one owner.
Yeah, so it's only one owner. So essentially, it's
Well,
like
who's
you're
to say-
building an extra bedroom and bathroom, it's just detached from the house. So, cause if you built an extra bedroom and a bathroom that was attached to the house, you wouldn't be required to put in another.
But just think
But
of
if
it
that
from.
owner turns around and sells both properties separately,
Can't.
No, can't.
The ADU has
But
to
the city
stay
has
on
to look at it
state
from a
law.
financial standpoint too, like you're taking on that infrastructure out in the field. Like, so do you guys want that SDC, the system development money for that actual implementation of that? Or are we just installing it? Are they installing it and then
Well,
you're only paying one
But
unit
if I did an addition and built like an extra bedroom and bathroom on my house. And it wasn't freestanding, I'd still pay the upcharge on the SDC for it. So, I mean, if I'm doing tagging on, tandeming onto the existing system, I mean, I'm still paying the
with
equivalent.
an offset, right?
Yeah, the equivalent bulk of that addition. It's just that instead of my kids living under my roof and getting into my refrigerator whenever they want to, they have to live across the backyard in their own privacy. Or grandma and grandpa, or what have
Well, I mean,
you.
if we're talking, just to go backwards a little bit, if we're talking about our UGB and the possible almost distinction of us being able to implement more growth, then you're looking at less income coming in from the SDC standpoint if we're just letting people grandfather off one system.
Right, but it's still the same owner. If they came in and did a partition like a flag lot,
Right,
then
but what I'm
it's
saying,
all brand new
I'm just
stuff.
saying like from a budgetary standpoint, and from an infrastructure standpoint, but I mean, that's just my 2 cents. I just wanted to put that in there.
I think that's a good point. It's a policy choice, right? It's kind of saying, I don't want to oversimplify it, but some revenue sacrifice for the city versus more affordable units.
Right.
It's a policy choice. I don't think there's a right or wrong.
Right, that's pretty much it.
Jason, did I also hear if there's gonna be more population on this property, the original house's infrastructure may not handle another person or
Correct.
two? So that was also a concern.
Right.
And then I also heard you say the pipes have to be big enough, but what condition they're in is your question.
Well, I mean, yeah, they have to be adequate to support the infrastructure from a size and condition standpoint.
Isn't that part of
regardless.
So there would be a standard, if there would be language in there that if you tied into the existing water and sewer, is that at the building permit stage, they would have to do the analysis to determine that the pipe sizes are adequate enough to support the addition of the accessory dwelling unit. And if they went through and looked at it and they said, oh, the pipes are too small, then they'd look at it and say, oh, now I need to replumb my house. And they say, nah, it's cheaper just to do a new sewer and water tank and pay the SDCs.
Does this whole discussion of the ADUs include hardship dwellings?
No,
So in the city coding system, are hardship dwellings allowed?
no, but that's usually nomenclature for counties.
Yeah.
Where I've got my 80 acres and I've got my house and it says I can only have one structure on it. You can, in Yamhill County, you can go to the county, file the applications and go through their process to get a hardship because I have an elderly parent who is under medical care and we need to do this for 2 years. And the county will review it and they'll issue a decision of yes or no. But those type of regulations do not exist within the city of Yamhill. I have actually not seen a hardship standard
I've never even
within a
heard that.
city.
There is one,
Here,
at least one, yeah.
there's no language in the code for it.
And there are also requirements for hardship dwellings that when the hardship ends, the dwelling must be removed.
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever been enforced, I'm aware.
No, the ADUs do not address hardship.
So, I'm just trying to loop back to what I've been hearing. Is it really the infrastructure piece is the one kind of part of this that's still up for debate? Because again, this is another one of those things where people can take some time to think about it. And when we come back at the next meeting, maybe have solidified some thoughts around it.
With that, I mean, I can write it, and if you want to strike it
Right.
later, that's fine.
Well,
It's there. It's easier to delete than it is to add.
The language is gonna include information about ensuring that the pipe is adequate for.
That we would have,
But
that, you
the
know,
issue is the financial piece. That's.
Right.
That's
That's
the question that was raised, yeah.
Right, so the question would be, is that if, I wanted to put an ADU in my backyard and have my kids live in it, or my elderly father. Am I compelled to pay, I don't know what a new sewer hookup is here, 10 grand? Yeah, or would it be treated just like I'm building, if I just said, I'm not gonna do it, I'm just gonna build an extra bedroom and bathroom onto my existing house. And I only have to pay $2,500. That's sort of the question, right? And so what are you mandating people's behavior via governmental fee intervention?
all right. So let's move on because we still got a lot of stuff to get through.
I was just gonna say, despite my ambitious agenda, I think we're gonna be here till 8 o'clock, if that's okay with folks. I apologize for my optimism.
It was great. I loved it. Journey, next slide, please. All right, so again, this is a little bit difficult to read, but we're gonna get in, now we're gonna be talking about setbacks for all of the different zones. And so this is kind of the bullet point list, and so we'll get into the tables to look at what your options are to consider. So next slide. Housing types. So detached, single-family homes. You currently allow an R1, R2, R3 in the RLC. You do not allow single-family homes in your multifamily, your RM. Say, do not add single-family into your RM. Keep that for multifamily purposes. You have no land designated for that, but it's on your list. Two-family changed again the nomenclature to duplex. But duplexes would be allowed in R1, R2, R3, RM, and RLC. So all of your residential zones be allowed for a duplex. Your accessory dwelling units would be allowed in your R1, R2, and R3, and your RLC. So we just talked about the ADUs.
I'm assuming the yellow is the change.
I apologize. It looks like we missed yellow in this one, but the yellow, those are the proposed changes.
Comments on that? Kind of aligns what we're talking about with duplexes and the ADUs. Okay, next slide. Development permits required. So again, single family in the zones R1, 2, 3, don't allow it in the RM, but in the RLC, so you don't have to get a development permit to build a single family home. This proposal again changed two-family to duplex. But then all your duplexes and all the zones that allowed, you would not need a development permit. You're treating it the same as a single family. Your accessory dwelling units do not require a development permit. They require building permits, each of these, but they don't require a land use development permit.
Will that cost the city revenue?
Yeah, a little bit. So the ADUs, again, would not have to go through that land use permit process.
But the city also wouldn't be spending money on reviewing
All
the
of
land
those
use, the land use permits.
Most cities do not have a 100% cost recovery. Your general fund always seems to support planning functions. Something to consider.
And the motivation for this is to smooth the path for more population density.
To allow a variety of housing types, these three different types, and deal with them in an economical way, at least from the person who's building the structure, to accommodate your population growth over time. Being efficient with the land supply that you have.
So this would potentially encourage development?
Could, yes. If you make it easier to do an accessory dwelling unit, and then you may have somebody that says, oh, I've got an aging parent and I need to have them close by. I need them within 15 or 20 feet. And it's economical to build a 1,000 square foot accessory dwelling unit. And they've got a small kitchen, they got living space, they got a bedroom, they got a water closet with a shower, and they're right there.
I would probably phrase it as removing barriers to seeing, to the development of duplexes and accessory dwelling units. I don't know if it's encouraging as much as just, I mean, you can look at it that way, but it's definitely just removing some code barriers to seeing those developed.
Next slide.
So just before we move on, then I guess the city is, to Jason's point earlier about chipping away at the revenue for the city has got to look at the overall and long-term effect on their budget. And
Policy, those are policy choices by the council. Okay. All right. So now we're dealing with setbacks. This is a little bit more complicated. So currently in R1, your front setback is 20 feet. R2 is 20, R3 is 20, RM is 20, and the RLC is 20. What we've suggested here, based on our analysis, is for your R1 is to go to 15 feet for the living space, but keep the 20 feet for the garage. There's a thing called snout houses. Snout houses are the thing you see when you get to the house is the garage. I live in a snout house. That's the feature you see in the living spaces behind. In this way is that, and it doesn't mean that you have to do it that way, but it would say, oh, what you see predominant is the living space, the house and the garage is tucked behind. It gives you a much better street appeal than having a snout house and all you see is nothing but garages when you go down the road. The other part of this is in the RM is that if you have a duplex, again, and they had a garage, the same thing, the living space could be at 15 feet, but the garage would have to be back at 20 feet. So trying to create some consistency of what the houses could look like as you're going down the street, be it a single family or a duplex.
But being that it's only a 5-foot adjustment, it would also be consistent with the houses similar to the houses that had been built in the past. It wouldn't be a wild departure from what we've been doing.
5 feet. I'm only 5.5 feet tall, so it just cut me off from about here.
Yep,
That's what you get.
What's typical though for like other cities our size? You know, like a Lafayette or Dayton or.
As I've seen is they're going through and updating their codes. They're going more towards this direction. Create that living space, make it visible when you're going down the street, make it inviting.
No, I'm talking about 15 versus 20.
Yeah. I've seen more 15s for that living space.
I believe Lafayette's at 15 for the new developments, and they're all snout houses. Seems to be a lot of them anyway.
It's an old style.
Yeah.
I don't see the garage setback on this list. That's
It's on there. It's the footnote on the bottom,
One of the
the first
footnotes.
asterisk.
Thank you.
And then there's another section in the code for residential, which I have to retitle because it's confusing, but it's very prescriptive that a garage or a dwelling unit has to be set back 20 feet.
Yes.
So it would end up in two places.
So Doug, this is all compliant with fire code also?
Yes.
Okay.
Just so everyone knows, the single asterisk says detached single family duplex, 15 to living space, 20 to garage, which Doug mentioned. The 2 asterisk says duplex 15 feet to living space, 20 feet to garage, so single family duplex. And then the 3 asterisk, which are some of the denser zones, it says 15 feet to duplex, 20 to multifamily.
Because you have different dwelling types that you can put in different zones.
This is not developer friendly. This is what we want our city to look like. The developer's gonna, okay, 5 more feet of driveway.
No, it's not increasing. They already have a requirement. The garage has to be set back 20 feet.
Okay.
So we're not increasing their cost for putting in a driveway to get into that
They
garage.
can still build a snout house and put the front door 25 feet back.
They could.
Okay.
They
All
could.
right.
Yep. If they wanted to do that.
All right, I get it.
Ken's good at this game.
The next row was in the R3 and the RM is we're proposing a 15-foot separation for those multifamily buildings. So there's some airspace between them essentially. Then the next one, separation 2 or more main buildings for detached. So remember, duplexes can be attached or detached, or they can be vertical. One unit on top, one on the bottom. So this one, we're talking about those separations when they're horizontal, is that they would be 10 feet in all zones. Your rear setback, you basically across the board in all zones, you have a 20-foot. And so we looked at to create that flexibility. So when you're dealing with the front of the house, 15 feet, 20 feet to a garage, is we suggested going to a 15-foot rear yard setback. Again, it's being more efficient with the land supply you have. Rear setback on corner lots. Now, one of the things that we've talked about before, and you would say this whole issue about stories, 1 story, 1.5 story, 2 story, strike it out of the code. It's completely old nomenclature. It's just you're dealing with building height, type of dwelling unit, and height of the structure. But on these rear setbacks, on these corner lots, it's right now you've got R1 is 14, R2 is 14, and then your other zones are 20. And we looked at it, I looked at it and said, why don't you just do 15 across the board for all the zones on a corner lot?
The reason to have a larger setback for a 2-story is that it really looms on the neighbor. That you know, the building 2-story building gets closer to the fence, it's huge in your sky. Maybe that's why it existed.
It could be, but I'll go back to Steve's earlier comment. If you were looking to do an urban growth boundary expansion for residential land, one of the things you're gonna have to go through is analysis of efficiency of what your regulations currently are. So I'm also kind of trying to think ahead.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, now might be the time to adjust those setbacks now. You could deal with it later.
I'm not against it, I'm just kind of thinking about why it was, and hey, density is density. Density means creepy.
Everybody hates density.
Yeah, but here we go, smaller setback.
Well, and I mean, essentially, I think what Doug's also saying with that is that, you know, if you adopted something that is less efficient and you put it forth with your urban growth boundary expansion, 1,000 Friends will litigate against you to prevent your expansion.
They will anyway.
Well, they will, but they will actually have the ammunition to prevail.
Correct.
Instead of just hang you up for years, so.
Hang you up for years.
And there's trade-offs on all these.
Yeah.
On the urban growth thing, I asked AI and they said in Oregon, all cities, including those with a population under 10,000 required to maintain a 20-year inventory for population growth throughout their urban growth. But I don't think I imagined that.
I've always been like Steve, is like every city's got to have a 20-year land supply.
Can you hand me that email from Sean? I don't know if he addressed it or not.
Table it, but I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
I don't want to skip over this. I want to see it. You know, I went into the Oregon land use documents and I couldn't find it. This summer.
If we want to have a city that is growth oriented and is encouraging growth, and to remove that requirement for a 20-year land supply is counterproductive, in my opinion.
Yeah, I bet if it was removed, I would be surprised. And we've been met on the edge of, I guess we are doing it very slowly. Now with Walt leaving, we're gonna have to restart it again. A land inventory, you know, what do we have?
We just did that.
Yeah, right. And this is because we are looking to expand urban growth boundary because we felt like this is what we want to do. As a matter of fact, we're required to, but the way you describe this new thing is like, you can just sit there and do nothing.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, when you look at the population projection for the city of Yamhill, what we 70 years out is 100 smaller than we are now.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I
Some
shared
people
that in one of our
yeah.
meetings. It's like, you're kind of going up and then all of a sudden
That
going down.
brain is what happened there. That's I mean, that's not what I would have thought at all.
Aging population.
Yeah.
Declining birth rates and aging population.
Well, that's what it does to the schools too, because a lot of people moving in, you know, don't have kids.
Melissa, if you're there, I was trying to look on my phone for the email you sent with some of these population thresholds. If you're able to find that, maybe you could forward it to me again and I could have it at the top of my email so I could, thank you, appreciate it. Cause I asked these same questions of Melissa and she was very helpful and gave me a list of some of the different population thresholds, so I'll give you some more on that. Next slide. And so again, this is just some more of what's in your code now. Like I said, my suggestion is we get rid of the story stuff, so this would change a little bit. On your corner, you know, if you get rid of the 2.5 story, if you just go with a building height, then we would set setbacks accordingly. But this is the general concept of the setbacks. Now, on this, if the committee is acceptable, I mean, I could write the code language that way, and then when you have it all there and you're looking at it, you could say, no, we want to make an adjustment. We want to have this, or no, we don't want to change this one. We want to leave it the old way that it was.
And we'll have opportunity to do that.
You'll have that at your next meeting.
Can we get to side setbacks?
Side setbacks, that was on there.
Yeah. Side setbacks, which is on this page, right? That's up there, setbacks.
Yep, we're about to
Okay.
talk about that now.
We are. I jumped ahead. I'm so sorry.
So like I said, so we've got this one on. So the first line here is your rear setback. Again, the way your code is structured when I originally put this together was corner lots. If you had a 2.5 story, you'd have to have these setbacks. So we were looking at suggesting reducing those. Again, it all ties into what your conclusion is on how you measure the building height. And typically that's what's done in Oregon. The issue of stories is in the building code. There's a specific purpose for that. But most of what you see in your land use regulations, you just regulate, here's the map, here's the height of the structure, and that's dealt with by the Oregon Structural Specialty Code as a definition. You take the ridge, you take the eave, and the midpoint of that distance, that's your structure height. And the way your code is currently written is has a maximum. It just says the highest point is 35 feet.
Yeah. And then a flat, so a building with a flat facade to the front of it would just be 35 feet still.
Right.
Yeah, but I did look into that. That is correct. That almost everything's moved away from what we do.
Joy, you were talking about the side setbacks. So right now in R1, it's 7.5 feet. In R3, it's 7.5. Your RRM is 7.5 and your RLC 7.5. And so I put on the table for discussion to reduce those.
So my question is it 5 feet from the building to the plot line and then 5 feet to the next from the plot line to the building? Or is it 5 feet between the two buildings?
There's two different things that are in the code. So under that one, it would be, you had the property line, you had the structure, it would be, under this suggestion, it would be 5 feet.
So it'd be
The
10
one on the other side, there'd be 10-foot separation between the buildings. If you had just buildings on one lot, then we were looking at that 15-foot separation. So it would be a little bit less than if you had two separate lots, or a little bit more.
I just needed to make sure it wasn't 2.5 feet between the two. 2.5 feet to it's like stand sideways to walk between the buildings.
Now that's to the building wall. Then you've got the eave overhangs, and the code has how many feet you can project with an eave into that setback, which is typically 2 to 3 feet.
Okay, thank you.
How does that fit then with like fire code?
All of what I suggested will comply with fire code.
I would hope so, but it just seems like
It's
it's awfully close.
if you're building wall and eaves. If I remember this correctly, is if you have an eave projection that's more than 3 feet, then you need to fireproof that eave. So there is building code things that come beyond the land use portion of how you would construct that building.
The walls have to have a certain hour rating.
And if you get closer, then you have to have 1 hour walls, and you can have windows, but they need to be fire rated windows. And so there's a whole plethora of other standards in the building code. Generally, are we okay with the concept on setbacks? Subject to further discussion at the next meeting. All right, Bernie, next one. So this one, we're gonna get into lot sizes. And so this is just the bullet point list. Next slide. It's gonna be hard to read. Yeah, so lot size, right now in your R1, you have a 7,000 square foot minimum lot size.
you have options, and I've listed those. You could go down to 6,500, 6,000, 5,500, 5,000. I've seen communities all of in that range. But again, if you were looking to do a UGB expansion in the future, one of the things you look at is efficiency. Like, we've got these big lots, can we make them smaller? So I kind of always have that lens sitting over here on this side about what your future might be.
If
So-
we were to choose the bigger size.
You could leave it at
the
7.
Future went to apply for the, are you more likely to be denied? Or are they gonna say you need to?
You would have to have the policy discussions when you're putting together your project proposal. And one of the efficiency measures you would want to consider is, should we adjust our minimum lot size?
For future building within the new UGB.
It would apply to the entire city. So as an example, in R1, currently you're at 7,000 square feet. Let's say that you said, no, 6,500 square feet would be the new minimum. That'd mean that any lot that's created either through a partition or a subdivision, the minimum lot size would be 6,500 square feet in R1.
So here's a question. So in terms of, and this, I may be getting way ahead of the conversation. So when you're saying, okay, if we were gonna annex 100 acres to do stuff, and we're divvying it up between the various R zones, and within that 100 acres, 1,000 Friends wants to see this level of square footage built, right? Less, public dedications. and things like that.
25% free public street.
Yeah, so if you said, okay, so we're gonna adopt the larger single-family housing lot standard, but we're going to actually, in the high-density area, we're gonna actually have that denser than, on the denser side of it. Is there some efficiency analysis that says, these are bigger, this is smaller, and it's all a
You
wash?
should try to make that case.
Okay, so that tells me no.
You can try to make that case.
Like the way you put that.
Yeah,
In the world of land use, I've learned that there's very little that's absolute.
Everything's a trade-off.
Yeah, so, and then you have the thing on the 2-family, which would change to duplex, is that if you had a lot and you divided it, it's gotta be 50% of whatever your minimum lot size is. And so we didn't propose changes to that in your R1 through your RM. Your duplexes, the 2-family, we've identified, make that lot size the same as a single family. So right now you have 7,000. If you do duplexes, minimum lot size is still 7,000. It's just how the design of the structure looks, but it would be consistent. So again, kind of that similar scenario in the R2, we gave you options to consider. 6,500, 6,000, 5,500, or 5,000. Same standards would be retained for dividing it for a duplex. And then again, for a duplex is that the lot size would match whatever you keep for your single family. R3, very similar. There we suggested 5,500 or 5,000 square foot minimum lot size. Keep the same language for the duplex. The 2-family, 6,000 square foot to match what your current code is, or if you went to 5,500, then it would be 5,500 square feet. RM, 6,000 square foot. So again, if you went down to 5,500 or 5,000 square feet, then we would change the 2-family to match that. And then over in your RLC, there we said for a duplex, it would be a minimum 5,000 square foot lot size. We added the language that if you divided a lot with a duplex on it, so it matched the other zones, place that was missing. And then just a typical 2-family, a duplex just on a single lot. Again, it would match whatever your base lot size is for the RLC. Currently it's 6,000 to 8,000. So that was my approach. Thoughts?
Ken, when did you guys shrink the lot size?
Yeah, I'm just trying to look that up.
It was like 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I'm surprised that R1 is still 7,000. I was just trying to look it up, but okay. Now, we shrunk it to 6, I guess, on the others, but I don't know why we didn't do R1. And I can't remember.
Has anybody else gotten feedback from the community on that? Because I've heard from several people that they were not real happy that the lot sizes shrunk. And that the houses are now getting closer and closer together. So I wonder if that's something that we might wanna, again, understanding if we were to move an urban growth boundary, that's something we'd have to do then.
Something you would want to look at.
Yes. I almost wonder if it might not be worth not doing that now. Unless anybody has an opinion the other direction. Then you want to say about
I
it?
mean, one of the things that I actually was saying to Jason is obviously the more exponentially more lots you create by having density, there's your offset for your system development charges and, you know, permitting fees and things like that. So from a budgetary standpoint, it's better to have multiple small lots. But that being said, you know, I mean, gosh, I think people will be pretty excited to build on a 6,500 square foot lot. I mean, that's roomy today. But I mean, the offset would be, I'd like to see, you know, 30 units per acre on the multifamily density.
I know this is probably an impossible question, but if we're going out to get urban growth boundary, where do we have a reasonable, how high can we keep the lot size and still have a reasonable argument for expanding the urban growth boundary?
That was hard. I don't think we can give you an answer to that. I don't even think Melissa can give you an answer to that. I don't even think the housing team can give you an answer to that. What I've been told in the other communities I've worked in, is that, you know, they will look at what a community's done in the past and what they're proposing to do and kind of take that as a whole, but there's no, there is rulemaking going on, so in the future, there may be some safe harbors or some thresholds that they say, here's what you need to meet, but right now, it's not that well defined.
Well, it looks good if in the past you've reduced it a little bit.
Yes, you definitely can say, hey, yeah, we've done some reductions already.
How about the comparable test? What is the minimum lot size in comparable cities?
Yeah, I think that would be something that they would look at. I don't know the answer, but that's right. I think that might be something that they would look at.
It depends on your topography. I mean, I do some work for another city and they're on a hill, so they have to have larger lots.
Yeah.
Where if you're flat, you could have smaller lots.
But one interesting thing, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis report that we talked about that allocates housing units to all the cities in the state does have lists of what was the term you just used? Comparable city, that's not the right word, but they do have, I believe, identify a number of cities that are comparable. That's not the right word, but I think you get what I mean. And we could take a look at what, you know, not that those cities have done urban growth boundary expansions, but you know, if you got to a point where you were trying to think ahead and be like, okay, what changes are gonna be enough? That might be an approach we would use.
See, I would say to the person that was saying, I don't like the houses are closer together, you just talk about the pressure between expansion and farm ground. And land is getting more expensive, and if young people are gonna be able to afford a house, a smaller lot size is gonna help that.
Yeah.
However,
and you've got your
they
big,
come out here because they want yard space for their children.
You're right.
and if they can afford it, I guess a developer might build for them.
They just did.
Yeah, so maybe there's a choice, a developer can can do big lots if he wants, but got the option. What sells? Is the market driving it? Maybe is give the developers options to make smaller houses if that's what they think their demand is.
Well, and I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we have major infrastructure issues that we have to solve before we can continue to build in this community.
Yeah,
Our water, our fire, our police, like, we don't have the infrastructure to support a larger community right now.
And what's the projected desired timeline for an expanded urban growth boundary?
It takes years.
I mean, like, but what does the city, like, we're talking about planning for that and wanting that, like.
There's no hard
who
plan
wants
for
it
that at this
and
point.
when?
Right.
It's all about 5 to 10 years out, as is the water, about 5 years out.
If you push, so from what I understand, if you pushed hard for urban growth expansion today, it would be 10 years.
Okay.
Is that about what you understand?
About 5 to 10, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I'm then confused because if we're hearing that our population is actually gonna get smaller, why are we talking about expanding the urban growth boundary?
So
Well, that's over a 75-year horizon and it's all the way out at the end of that
Okay,
75
okay.
year.
and that is also if we do nothing to expand urban growth, because we're not mandated to. So if we did, if you build it, they will come, that would change the whole model by not
Possibly,
changing
we don't have
potentially.
access to easy public transportation. I think there are some other challenges. I know a large goal of the project was to discuss the commercial infrastructure and improving the business area. And we've spent a lot of time on residential codes. I understand the reason and the intent to update them so that we have the plan in the future. We are spending far less time on the business development portion of the project.
Well, that's the next section after we get done with the residential, then we get into the downtown. What do you want to do about lot sizes? Keep them the same? Do you want to make some adjustments?
I recommend a compromise where we keep them the same, which is we've lowered it. So instead of putting it back to the larger lots, but keeping it where we've currently got it and not lowering it even further.
I don't think that we should lower it further at this point.
Yeah, we considered it recently and that was about the threshold we felt like was appropriate. So I feel like the 7,000 is a question mark in my mind on the R1, but the rest of them are fine.
So, okay, so I'm hearing, keep what you've got for your minimum in all your zones, but then for your duplexes, the same lot size for a duplex as you would have as your base zone for a detached single family.
Which is what's consistent with state law, yes.
I would.
Ish.
Yes. Ish.
Good.
All right, okay, I'll circle those.
And R1 stays at 7?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, next slide, lot width. We're almost done with the difficult stuff. So on this table, you've got your various lot widths and depths for the different type of uses, the way your code is currently structured. And so in an R1, you've got a 60-foot lot width, and that applies to R1, R2, and R3. Your RM is 60 feet and your RLC is 50 feet. So what we've identified is you might want to consider reducing your lot width down to either 50 feet or 55 feet. And then a corollary to that is to get rid of your lot depth. Let the developer figure out, if you've got your widths established, they're gonna fit a house onto that. You've already got your front and rear setbacks. And let them fit the house on that lot and not mandate that it's gotta be 90 feet deep. Because you're also gonna have potential situations where you've got these riparian stream corridor floodplain issues, and I brought this up before. And you might have a developer says, well, I want to give that to a conservation group. And so they want to, and all of a sudden, if you had started with 90 feet and the back 15 feet was in that, I'll call it a sensitive land area, there's a process you go through with variances and all of that, but it's an onerous process. And so I have been kind of advocating for a number of years now is lot depth is really kind of irrelevant. It's really the width. And then let your setbacks and then let the developers fit the house on it.
Meet the minimum, and then that would.
You have a minimum 7,000 square foot lot size.
Make more sense.
But it gives the homeowner flexibility to build the house that they want to build and the style that they want to build, which I think is important to people that live.
So that's a minimum
out here.
So let's say.
So the depth to me doesn't, I mean.
Just
I think
a big
I agree with
backyard.
you on that it doesn't really matter. The width though.
The width, you're, like I said, currently you got 60 feet. You could consider a 50-foot width. Seen that a lot. Could be 55 feet. Or you can keep it at 60.
I think 60 is a beautiful number.
I'm hearing a whole bunch of heads shaking on 60. All right, so we'll keep that. And then in your RLC, keep that one at 50. Lot depth.
Does anybody else have an issue with lot? Because he's correct. I mean, some of the
It really is
available land that we have to build on would run into just that issue.
Right, and you don't want that, you don't want to own that as your backyard,
No.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
The 6,000 square foot lot and a 60-foot width would have a 100-foot depth.
That's a minimum width. Yeah.
A long lot. And if you made it 50, it would be a really long lot. So I'm,
50 by 100 is sort of the standard, like, city lot, like if when you're like, you know, in a conventional subdivision, yeah, it's like 50 by 100.
that'd be 5,000 square feet.
Yeah. And so if you were doing, you know, whatever it is, the 6,000, 60 feet by whatever, and you just let it.
60 by 100. So that's a comfortable size. That's about right. Okay. Just wanted to.
I've added in here on your lot width for your two-family divided lot. It was missing in your table, so I just went 30 feet, so it matches what you had in your RLC. When I do the final math, it should all work out. Lot width for two-family, that's a duplex on one lot. You really didn't have any standards? So I kind of put in for discussion either 50 or 55, but if you're gonna keep 60 for your detached, then we want to keep the same.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll write that in. And lot depth, two-family divided, okay, that goes away. Depth, building height. So this is where we first get into this. That's heard me talk about this many times. So again, your code says maximum height, that's the tallest part of the building in residential is 35 feet. So that's to the top of your ridge line. That is not.
Does that include non-residential as well?
It will. We'll get to the downtown. In the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, again, it's the midpoint between the ridge, very top of the building, and the eave line. You measure that distance, you take that midpoint, and that's where they measure building height. So now what you've got is planning staff doing a review under one methodology, and then your plans examiners doing a review under a different methodology. But then they have to understand that you've got this maximum 35 feet. Mine is follow the Oregon Structural Specialty Code. It applies statewide. Somebody asked last time, will that create an extra floor? No, not in a single family.
That OSSC is Oregon.
Oregon Structural Specialty Code.
I definitely think that's what we should be
Yeah.
following.
Yes. Okay. All right, so we got that one. Next.
You got some of the hard ones. Good job.
Parking. Again, we've already had the conversation, no off-street parking for an accessory dwelling unit. So we make that clear in the code. If you're doing multifamily, I know we're talking about housing, but there is HB 2180, which is the electric vehicle infrastructure. You have to do that. It's a building code requirement. So we would add that into the code. And then there's some odd little things on the parking widths in residential, and I will look at that to make sure they're consistent across the board, because they've got some different stuff. So that one was pretty easy. Okay,
Say multifamily, how many
I said,
parking spots per?
no, there was a new law that was passed that any commercial development that occurs and multifamily is considered commercial development in the building code, is that you have to put electric vehicle infrastructure in with that
I
development.
heard that, but you're not addressing yet in the code how many parking spots you need per unit of multifamily dwelling.
No, because that's not part of the scope of this project.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question, I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
So it says here, one off-street space for duplexes, that means one space for each.
Oh, I missed that, sorry.
duplex.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, each duplex has to have one off-street parking space.
Thank you.
So that again, if you were a community in the old of 10,000, between 10,000 and 25,000, we're following those regulations. They've lowered that population threshold down to 2,500. You're a little bit less than that, but we've talked about using those same standards.
And a developer could choose to have more than the one,
Right,
but the one is required.
thank you.
Next slide. Manufactured homes. And mobile homes. And so I just need to fix all the language in that chapter because it's just outdated. The references are outdated, so I need to fix all of that. And then make sure between, you got manufactured home, manufactured dwellings, manufactured home parks, you got mobile home parks, and you got prefabricated structures. So I will fix all of that to make it consistent. Development standards. And so Stephen, I've talked about this, is there's nothing in your zoning ordinance about your density. So we'll make sure what's in the comp plan is applicable and in your zoning ordinance as well. That one was easy. And then next slide, Journey. Those are all the things that we've talked about. Yay.
They have an answer.
I have answers. I can proceed forward. Now we'll get to the downtown. Yeah.
Digress just a minute. I don't want to make us stay here till 10 o'clock. But I'm lost as to why you in the residential code audit and concepts, you eliminate the lot length. Can you just give me just a quick cliff notes from reason as to why you eliminate
The depth?
Yeah.
The depth. If you establish your width, you have your setbacks, and you have your lot size, the 7,000 square feet. The developer can say, okay, I just want a 60-foot lot in width. I know I need to have 7,000 square feet, and so my depth will be established.
7,000 that prevails.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Downtown code, next slide, please. The type 1 through 4, we already had that conversation, so we can move on to the next one. Architectural design standards, so here's the building height issue that we've talked with you about, we've talked with the community about, and we just talked about it for single family using the Oregon Structural Specialty Code. Do you want to increase your building height in your central business district to 45 feet?
Yes.
Because currently it's 35 feet. Now, before I said what we're typically seeing in new construction for commercial is somewhere between 12 to 15 foot ceilings on the ground floor. Everybody wants to create this open, airy feeling. And then when you get to the upper floors, they're going to be 8 to 9 feet. Between each floor, you need about 2 feet to accommodate all your mechanical, electrical ducting and all of that. With the way the code is written is just a maximum of 35 feet. You're pushing that envelope to try to even get a 3-story building. 45 feet would definitely make sure you get 3, and a good architect could try to get 4 in there. What I've seen in different pro formas is to do a mixed use project in a downtown area is they need 3 floors of residential with a ground floor of commercial. Doesn't mean everyone, but at least the numbers I've seen. Because they need the residential income, because that stabilizes to be able to help support the commercial, because the commercial space has a more frequent turnover rate. And so you may have space that's vacant for a period of time.
Lower cost per square foot rents.
Yeah.
Journey, next slide, please, just so we can.
There we go.
Why make the architect struggle to do 4 stories? Why not say 50 feet?
You can say 50 feet.
It doesn't even struggle to do an extra one.
I was trying to find the height of on the left is the Atticus in McMinnville. I was trying to find the building height and I couldn't find it. Doug estimates it at 42, about
Yeah, I think it's 45.
somewhere in there. But while I was looking for the building height, I did see, I think their building height limit is 80 feet in that area. But anyway, we wanted, and Shelley asked for us to find some visuals so you can see the difference on the left of a building that's in that 40 to 45 range, and the one on the right that's probably in the 35 range. But what Doug is saying is developers are finding that the one on the right is not as feasible to build because they need that third story of residential, not just 2 stories of residential. That's out of my wheelhouse, but.
And in a central business district environment, the difference between the two in terms of like the public perception of height and massing is imperceptible. I mean, nobody's gonna like go, oh my gosh, that's an extra story there. I'm horrified. I mean, it doesn't do that. The Atticus itself is actually got a lot of mass because it's just a box. mean, it doesn't have a lot of, I mean, there's no articulation, there's no, I mean, it's one material. I mean, I don't, again, I'm not saying articulation and mixed materials is the thing. I hate that, but, you know, it's not very imposing as a building when you're standing there on the street. I mean, it's kind of cute as far as a white box goes.
I think from an economic development standpoint for the city, our best opportunity for income to the city is that type of development, more so than SDCs and new houses. And
Yeah, I mean,
we're just kind of at the max there. This is where we can actually bring some new revenue.
right. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if, you know, if aspirationally we wanted a hotel in our central business district, a 2/1, which is the 3-story building, you can't make that math work. So, I mean, you're pressed to make a 3/1 work. You know, unless we have some substantial success with our economic development work. But I mean, it's, you gotta have the vertical in order to make it pencil.
Thoughts?
You dream of bringing back the hotel that burnt down once,
Hotel Royale.
the Hotel Royale,
There was some, oh, sorry, go ahead.
which was 4 stories, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was 4
3.5
stories.
stories.
Right, it had partial.
Yeah,
It had an open basement.
couple steps down, but yeah, I'm looking at a picture of it right now.
Oh,
But assuming that the folks standing out front were
5'5".
5'5", you're looking at 11, 12 feet
that's
for that first
imposing, I
story.
mean, for, that's
So I mean,
35.
they're over 35 feet in this.
Yeah, that doesn't.
for
that looks
100%
taller
sure of
than
this
the one
building.
on the
So
right.
when you look at the North Yamhill Bank building, the brick building that's on Maple and Main there.
Mhm.
So the current ceiling grid is lowered in there where you can see the sort of the white squares above the windows. Those windows actually are covered. They used to go that full height. So I mean, it was that ground floor in there was 15 feet plus. Because it was built as a bank and they wanted to convey, you know, strength and, you know, that sort
So
of
how
stuff.
tall is that building? Philip?
It probably 25 feet-ish. Yeah,
32.
32. Yeah, okay.
But you know, the thing is, people are not gonna like the idea of some people live in town of raising the building height or having a multi-story building. But he's not wrong with the fact that when you look at those buildings side by side, you can't tell the difference when you're standing on the street.
Well, and historically, we've had it. So I mean, there's precedent from the 1800s, right?
Yeah.
So,
Hearing 45 is okay, we'll propose it. Again, it's coming back at your next meeting. You have time to consider it, think about it, okay? Drive-up uses in the central business district. We've
Right.
talked with the community, and the community said, we
Right.
don't want it downtown. And so I can write language that does not allow drive-through uses in the central business. That means anything you have is grandfathered
Grandfathered, yeah.
in,
That nobody else can do it now.
but you cannot add new.
Yep.
Okay?
So not like a McDonald's drive-through, but we can do a coffee drive-through.
Well, the
no,
Coffee drive-through's grandfather.
yeah,
But I mean, any new coffee drive-throughs.
you cannot do it
correct.
Would not be.
Not in the central business district, but you could do it
outside.
outside of it.
And a gas station's not considered a drive up.
No.
Just gonna ask that.
You drive your car up to the gas pump.
Well, you
And
do
then-
at the store too.
So that, we actually learned this with the planning commission with that gas station, that in the state of Oregon, when you park your car at a gas pump, that is considered a parking spot.
But you still, I think the reason you want to eliminate some of the drive-through is the traffic and the lines. In a gas station, you could still have lines or.
Yeah.
No, this was you said that a drive-through is not good for a downtown. You were kind of one of the first one that brought this up. It just doesn't make sense. Why is that?
No, so one, any sort of drive-through activity because of the stacking lanes that you have. So one, you're on a major highway, right? You're on a state highway. So you have to provide adequate stacking on the site itself. So that's when you see like a Dutch Brothers, you've got the little coffee stand, you've got 8 cars that are actually on the lot lined up. That's your stacking lane. So anything that's busy, you have to contain the stacking on the site itself and allow for the circulation and exit back out onto the highway. You can't have a Dutch Brothers downtown and have cars backed out onto the highway because it's a safety hazard, right? So that's one of the things that you want to avoid. But what it does is it eats up available land supply, because the Dutch Brothers, when you look at it, they have a very, very tiny physical footprint versus all the pavement and stacking lanes that they have, and so it's not an efficient use of thing. And what you wanna do with the downtown is you wanna actually have, up to the curb, storefront, walkable, multi-bays so that people can, meander around and not have to worry about like being hit by somebody who's over caffeinated and leaving.
We talked about, talked about in prior meetings that the scope of this grant is not looking at the architecture and all that. That's a separate thing to go through. But there is a principle of creating what I call a room. Building on one side of the street, building on the other side of the street. That is your room. And so what your buildings look like in windows and articulations and corbels and all of that and awnings. And then you've got your pedestrian walkway area, which has different zones in it. And then you've got your parking, you got your traveling that's going, but then you've got your street trees, and then you've got your pedestrian furniture and benches and hanging plants and all that. It creates this living space. It's a room that's there, but that's outside of the scope of this project. But trying to look at is if you set the height first, then the city can try to seek other grant funds someplace to get into the issue about what do you want your buildings to look like? You have some basic standards already in the code, but they really don't address what happens above second floor, third floor, what it's gonna look like, what it should look like, how many square feet of window openings you should have. And that really also needs you to kind of have an architect. I've reviewed lots of architectural plans, but I'm not an architect.
You're closer to an architect than I am, so.
All right. Next one is on parking. We have three components on this one. Journey, next slide. Okay.
Just digress a minute again, we did agree to establish the 45 foot.
Yes. The loading areas. So you have provisions for loading in your very limited downtown area, which takes up usable space that you could have buildings on. So when I looked at it, it says, well, should you require loading in your downtown area? Well, you do have trucks and deliveries that are occurring. Could you do the loading out in the street? And I've seen communities that have said, you got a sign up that says loading zone from 8 a.m. to 12. It's kind of a slow time for your commercial anyway, so the trucks can pull up and do what they need to do. In the community meeting, we heard.
Thank you. I was gonna ask.
A very different is like loading is a problem in the downtown. Trucks are parking everywhere. They're blocking the vision clearance areas. You can't see. And so you've got this tension of you want commerce. Commerce requires trucks to deliver goods. But if you require it on site, then it's taking up valuable space where you could have buildings, which is creating tax revenue. So where do you want your loading?
Well, so I think one of the things that was not actually talked about in the public meeting is actually designated loading zones. And having those loading zones not be basically at the corner of whatever street and the state highway.
They gotta be at least 20 feet back from the intersection or.
Which resolves the conflict that people brought up that they had heartburn over.
So I don't have an absolute answer for you for that one, but I will continue to noodle on it when we bring it back.
There's plenty of side streets. I know in McMinnville, the loading zones are not on Third. There's one on Cowles, there's one on Evans, so on the side streets.
Well, so here there is no, it's wherever you deem to be a loading zone is a loading zone.
Stop.
Exactly.
There
And-
is potential loading zone areas behind the main buildings.
Right, well, so the
Like, there
building
could
that
be an
you're buying over
alleyway.
here, there's an alleyway, which would make a perfectly fine loading zone, and some of the side streets, by Larson House, I mean, back when I was a kid and that was Fran's, the beer trucks would park there, right? I mean, so there's places for it to happen, it's just that it's the Wild West and it's not controlled right now, and so.
They're not identified, yeah.
Yes, and so some people had some heartburn around that, which I mean justifiably so, right?
So the next topic was about your parking stall sizes. So we've talked with you, we've talked with the community. I grew up in a town much smaller than Yamhill. And we all drove trucks. Of course, you needed room to park your truck. And when you went to the local restaurant after you moved the irrigation pipe in the morning, you needed space to park your dirty, muddy truck. But they're very large, and so it takes up surface area. Now, you do not require parking in your central business district, but if you do provide parking, you've got these kind of bigger parking spaces. So I looked at it and put in a suggestion to reduce your current sizing down to 9 feet by 18.5 feet, which is a very typical standard size parking stall in any community. So that's one, and then your compact spaces is to set the minimum size of 8 feet by 16 feet. Again, very common standard that you see in communities.
Am I misremembering that at the public meeting, people were generally against this
In the
proposal?
community meeting, they were opposed.
Reducing.
Yep, correct. I mean, we're talking basically reducing 1 foot of width and a foot of length.
So, and those, I was just saying, those are off-street parking.
Off-street parking spaces.
Right.
Off-street parking.
Not
Yes.
on the
No.
highway.
No.
Yeah,
No, they're actually on somebody's lot.
private property, parking
They-
on private property.
Oh.
The citizenry wanted
I thought
to,
It's not street parking then.
no, they wanted to regulate the size of parking on people's owned property.
Were they clear on that though? I
Yeah.
don't remember that being.
I think I mentioned it, but there was still a consensus that they wanted to dictate what people's parking sizes were on their owned lots.
I got the impression it was like out in front of T&E and, you know.
Yeah, that's not regulated. That's just.
So what you
street
typically
parking.
see for an on-street parking space size, which is not in your zoning regulations, is that they are 8 feet wide and 20 feet long. Parallel, because you need enough room to be able to back in and out of that space. But we're not talking, we're talking about the private parking lots on private property.
Parking lots, yeah.
So we're talking, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Huh?
We don't have parking lots.
Post office does.
Again, it's that
And Bellwether.
your downtown does not require off-street parking spaces.
And the
So if I
bank.
build a new
Yeah, they.
mixed-use building, I'm not required for the commercial space to provide an off-street parking space. For multifamily above, then the parking applies for those units. And that has to be on the site. So when I was looking at this going, do we need these oversized spaces if you have a mixed-use project and you're taking up valuable land? Why not use kind of the standard that you see of 9 by 18.5?
But also on commercial parking lots too. So I mean, I guess I'm coming with Philip is that, how are you gonna, I mean, if you wanted to build a building that had parking, a parking lot, and he made them, for the size of a smart car, you probably won't get a lot of folks from Yam Hill because we don't have a lot of those. So that would kind of be to your own detriment, and maybe the next guy would increase the size of those parking
So
spaces.
the other thing to keep in mind is that if we, like I said, reduce these spaces basically a foot in width and a foot in length, then it applies to parking for industrial, it applies to parking for multifamily. They would all have this, it's all on the same table. Here's your minimum parking space
And
But to get
hotel
the-
parking.
and hotel parking.
He being minimum.
Well, so.
So you could, if a feed store moved in, they could make them twice that size if they felt like they wanted
If they
to.
wanted to.
Yeah.
So the hotel parking, however, if somebody built a hotel down in the urban core, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a commercial use that does not have a mandated parking requirement.
The way your code is written now is that it would not require off-street parking.
Now, so as a hotel operator who is very sensitive to the needs of one's guests, you definitely need to find someplace nearby that accommodates parking. So multiple hotels lease off-site parking when they're in an urban district. So I mean, that becomes the hotel operator's problem to solve. But mandating it on site is usually problematic. Because that's every building that we do, the building itself is the size and shape is almost as driven by parking as it is by the code language. So, because I gotta be able to park it in order to build it. And so I take the parking out of it first and
Sure,
then.
most of the old
whatever's left.
hotels in downtown Portland, the Heathman, the Governor,
Yeah.
those are all leased spaces away from, and so then as a
Yeah.
hotelier, you have that option to have a valet where it becomes an invisible problem to the guest.
Right, and what it does is too, is, you know, for the community, right, somebody who owns a surface lot 3 blocks away, they're going cha-ching, right? And they don't have to do anything to their lot, they just
Sure.
generate money, and so it's, I mean, it's not a bad thing.
In the case of a multifamily,
Mhm.
we should protect the renters from a developer getting his required number of spaces by making them very narrow. We should also not force the developer into making something that's inefficient and too big. So
Yeah, well, you gotta basically, the way the systems typically work is you just set, here's your minimum width and length for your
Yeah.
parking stall. And since we're not dealing with multifamily overall, then you typically, you say you can have only X number of spaces in a row, and then you have to have a landscape island, so it has a tree to create the shading and reduce the heat buildup and all that. We're not dealing with any of that, but it, typically what you see for a standard size stall is 9 feet wide, 18.5 feet long. Applies anywhere where you would build an off-street parking stall space or multiple spaces. So in a multifamily, you can't build them smaller than that. If they wanted to build them 10 feet wide and 20 feet long, they could do that. It's bigger than the minimum. And that would be okay. Then they've got to look at how many spaces do I need? So I've got X number of units, I got to have X number of parking spaces. Now, can I put, based on the number of units, do I have enough room to put my parking on and also meet my landscaping? Now we're getting down to the minutia detail, but they've got to consider all of that. And they may say, well, I wanted to have 10-foot wide spaces and 20 feet long, but it doesn't work because now I'm shy 5 spaces, so I need to go to the minimum size that the city has established in order to get the number of parking spaces that I need.
And I will say as a developer, you know, we do not build to short parking spaces. Because what it does is that so the cost to turn a unit, and this gets real esoteric and off thing, but the cost to turn a unit in terms of, you know, paint, carpet and downtime is not a great number to have to like carry, right? You want those units occupied. And so if I'm providing more than the minimum parking requirement in terms of units, and that makes my tenants stickier, makes them stay and not leave, that's what I'm gonna do. So, and
I
I
could build and sell and leave a mess behind.
right.
The other part of this is I'm gonna propose that of your parking that's required, based upon whatever it may be for multifamily or industrial downtown, it's not required. But if you do provide it, is that no more than 40% of your parking spaces can be compact spaces. So that would be the 8.5 by 16. Very typical to see.
What about handicap?
Handicap is regulated out of the Oregon Structural Specialty Code. There's a whole table. What's in your code is completely out of date, so I have to update that to refer back. So that's-
Yeah, and regarding multifamily, I know in McMinnville, they put in 4 apartment units nearby us, and I think they did 1.72 car spots per unit.
Generous.
So is that, or was it, because there's not enough parking?
Code's probably 1.5.
Maybe it was 1.5. I don't remember.
You'll
but-
often see in multifamily projects is that they will develop few more spaces than what a local jurisdiction requires as the minimum, just because of the number of tenants they may have because what you don't want to have happen in a multifamily project, there's no place to park and everybody starts parking on the street and the neighbors get all upset. Or they
Well, they
go across the
don't
street and park in
street.
somebody else's parking lot.
But there is an assumption that there will be some on-street parking, and sometimes that's worked into the code as well, right? But,
Yeah.
Can we agree on the recommendations?
yeah,
Yes.
Okay. The last
we're getting
one,
close here.
Can we agree to the sizes you recommend?
I took it as,
As a group?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
next slide. Oh, sorry.
the one more is, Walt had suggested maybe a maximum percentage of parking spaces that are allowed. I would say, now let the market drive that. Next one, Journey. So, we've already talked about no on the drive-in uses in the CBD. Motels,
No, the previous one, Journey, sorry.
I didn't
There
look
we
it up.
go, there we go.
Walt and I had talked about, you've got hotels and motels, and nobody builds motels anymore, they build hotels. Hotels are a 1950s to 1970s thing. So we talked about changing the definition, and I'll look more at this, but we talked about, overnight accommodations such as hotel. And then just kind of get rid of the whole.
Well, sure, because I mean, if you wanted to build a motel, you could still do that under that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then, in the CBD, no residential on the ground floors. I've heard that over and over again, okay? Not permitting industrial with the caveat is that if you were trying to do a distillery or a winery or something like that.
Roasting.
Yeah, yes, and so I can craft some language.
So I believe the way that it was supposed to be, and maybe actually is in the code at some point, is 51% has to be retail. The balance could be.
Yeah, so I'll look at that again, but I just wanted to make sure that when I originally came up, when I was looking at the code, is, was allowing industrial, I go, well, you really don't want that. But a limited type of industrial is primarily a commercial activity with some ancillary industrial that supports that. I can do
Which
that.
seems to be typically value-added food production.
Can we make it conditional use so that we consider things like impact on the buildings, the smell of whatever they're making?
We'll have to look at that, Ken.
Okay. I was gonna say coffee, but I thought I didn't.
Directed towards my house.
But there's like-
I was gonna say, right? Yeah, please roast more.
Because you have to have like the meet the DEQ
Yeah.
standard, so yeah, so there's like a thing, so it burns
There was
the
mixed-
smoke, like it takes. the
The way we had this conversation in our project management team, because the way your code is written, you have this public facility zone, which is actually an overlay that's written in the code different ways. But the way it's written is in your central business district, it allows every single use that's allowed within your public facility zone. So somebody could come in and buy up multiple lots and say, I'm gonna put in a school. It's like, well, that really doesn't help your downtown. So I'll look at it to limit the types of uses out of that public facility zone that can go city halls, fire stations,
Library,
parks,
maybe.
libraries, things like that. But you don't want these potentially larger campus type things making up your downtown, okay? Home occupations, you'll want to allow that if you have mixed use, somebody like me, live on an upper floor, sit behind a computer all day long. What's interesting about the way your home occupation is written is that what I do for a business, I would have to get a conditional use approval from the planning commission to do it. It's like, what? That's crazy.
Are you having people coming to meet you at your home office?
Nope, nobody comes to my home.
No, conditional use permit.
In Yamhill, the way the code is written, it lists out these very specific uses that are basically a type 1 review. And then any home occupation that's not one of those, it requires you have to submit a conditional use permit and go to the planning commission. There's a completely different way to write home occupations that's much simpler.
It was pre-Zoom. It was written pre-Zoom.
Yeah.
You said presume, but no, pre.
And always the confirmation, you want to have mixed use in your central business district, ground floor retail, residential up above, whatever that type be, market rate, affordable.
There's many stories, no. Just kidding.
Shelley, we got through that.
I like stories, I visualize that.
All right.
So again, permit, but do not require mixed use. We're not saying you have to do mixed use, but provide that opportunity for them to do mixed use. In the central business district, you need to allow single room occupancies. Steve and I will deal with that one. And again, no residential on the ground floor. So with that, we did it. We're done. There's lots of other cleanup that you will see. Again,
Journey.
when you get next meeting's packet, it will be large. Because there's literally every section in your zoning ordinance and in your land division ordinance will have changes in it. So you'll see strike throughs and you'll see double underlines, where all the changes are.
But what we will do is put a cover memo on that to point you to the sections that we talked about today that we want to revisit. That way you don't have to read through everything, you strike through and underline. We'll direct you to the ones that we think we've resolved, but maybe like the type 1 through 4. Or some of the other ones that are like the utilities on the ADUs, things like that. We'll direct, because we can't go through all this stuff in one meeting. We'll want to focus on some of these issues that maybe we still have some questions
A
about.
bigger one. And so what when you see it, because I mentioned before, and it was all this references, planning commission, you'll see a new nomenclature. It'll be the planning official. There'll be a definition of who is the planning official. And that definition will include that the planning official can designate somebody to do that work, which would be your planner.
Next slide, Journey. So next steps, here we are at CAC meeting 3.
Drive safely.
Doug's already started drafting some of the code, and so over the next couple months, we'll continue drafting the code and the comprehensive plan changes. We'll have one more meeting of this group with the drafts, and then we'll move into the adoption process. Next slide, Journey.
Can I ask real quick? On the meeting number 4, I think you had designated March, go
I
ahead.
didn't designate, this should have said due date, so we want to meet probably the second half of March. That gives Doug and me
Oh,
enough
not that
time.
night.
It doesn't have to be that night, it's just, sorry, I should have put due date. But so basically, yeah, we'll be drafting all these things. We propose meeting by the end of March. I kind of put together the schedule to make sure we hit our grant timelines. Then we'll have a planning commission and city council work session in April. We'll finalize things